tonight we're tackling the question we all want the answer to: where to make money in the current property market. And last month we looked at tips and traps of buying property, and one of the tips that we had was to seek advice, speak to experts to make good decisions on buying property, to make fast decisions, to make good property decisions, and to make it happen. So tonight we're really lucky to have three leading property buyers in the room with us. We've got Paul Glossop from Pure Property, we've got Jackie Parker from House Research Australia, and Christine House Search, sorry Jackie, and Christine Rutledge from Buy Right. So really lucky to have three experts in the room, and hopefully they can guide us in the right direction as to where to make money in the current property market. So really looking forward to that. So we'll get cracking. All right, before we go, disclaimer. Obviously, information provided tonight is from the experts, is just their advice or from their personal experience. Please seek your own independent legal financial advice before making any purchasing decisions to make sure that it fits your own personal circumstances. Australian Property Educators is brought to you by Aussie Home Loans and Keshev Chartered Accountants. My name is Scott LeCane. I'm one of the partners for Aussie Home Loans in Parramatta and Rouse Hill. We've been in business operating in Parramatta here for 15 years, the number one Aussie franchise for the last 5 years. We've won some industry awards as well, which we're really proud of. And most importantly, we're experienced property investors. As I say every time, we have a passion for property investing. All of the staff are investors in property. It's what we talk about between ourselves, which is why we decided to set up these workshops to share it with our clients and the wider community. Our customer value proposition is we work together with you to understand your needs and use our expertise to help you reach your goals. Now, Munzrul, would you like to introduce Keshab? Sure. And Keshab has Jeremy and Munzrul as business partners, and Jeremy's back from his honeymoon yesterday, so congratulations to Jeremy. He's a married man, and nice to see you. You're looking tanned from Cairns, so yes. Anyway.
That's the way. Yeah. Thank you, Scott. Keshev Chartered Accountant, I'm the principal. Jeremy and I, we're business partner, and Trevor Howes, our third business partner. So we've been in practice about 9 years, 10 years, and we both property investors. I've been investing about 18, 19 years, Jeremy a number of years as well. Many of our clients are in property investment clients. Most of our clients in different shape of business, and most of our clients are in property investments from their retirement, from their wealth creation as such. So we are passionate about the investment. We're not financial planner. We are accountant. We share our experience as such. I suppose our value proposition, if I may, is that we strongly believe on contributing to other people's lives. So anyone that we meet, anyone that we touch, I suppose, is that if there is somehow that we can make a difference, we'll love it. Thank you.
Thanks, Munz. So tonight's agenda, obviously we'll run through a quick market update and look at what's been in the media at the moment about finance and property. We'll touch on a few of the issues that are being spoken about across the broad media and how that affects investing and property. So we'll do that. The panel discussion, as I mentioned, we'll have our experts up, trying to get them to nail down some areas where we can make some money at the moment. Any questions that you've got for them, I'm sure they're open to receiving questions. Whether they give you direct answers, we'll see, but we'll try and nail them down on some spots to make some money. And then we'll do a wrap up. But before we do a wrap up, we're actually going to get them to run through some recent purchases that they've done, just to give us an example of what's happening out there in the market at the moment, some actual purchases that they're doing, which will be great to see. So the market update, what I wanted to do was just go through some articles that we're coming across in the media at the moment and just sort of outline it and maybe get Munzrul and Ross to comment a little bit as we go, but really just look at what's happening in the market. So I can't skip over it. I've got to talk about it. The Banking Royal Commission. The Guardian had a great article that came out that really just gave us a bit of a so far, where are we up to with it. So I'll just make some comments on that. Basically, the Royal Commission, we're about 6 weeks into the Royal Commission. Only another 10.5 months to go, so that's great. But obviously the purpose of the Royal Commission is to look at the financial institutions and see if they're engaging in any misconduct, and if that misconduct requires them to be prosecuted, basically, if there's any need for criminal or legal proceedings to be put against them. So far, what have we seen? We've seen alleged bribery, forged documents, repeated failure to verify customers' living expenses before lending them money, and mis-selling insurance to people who can't afford it. And last week, CBA admitted to financial planners charging people who are dead their continued fees. So it continues to roll on. Last week, the focus was on financial planners, and one of the big things that came out of last week's hearing was basically the financial planners charging people for advice, so Westpac Bank charging people for advice, and then selling them their own products. So the banks call it vertical integration, but what it was found was that 75% of cases that they looked at, the clients weren't given the best possible solution to their requirements. So they concluded that there was an inherent conflict of interest arising from the banks providing financial advice to retail customers while selling them their own financial products. So obviously charging someone for advice and then selling them your own product underneath was the big issue that came out of it.
Scott, also what I saw today, because we had my dad was in the office today giving a bit of assistance, and they had Sam Henderson on from, he owns a practice, Henderson, and Munzurul can share with you later, but they were playing tapes of his colleagues impersonating his clients, talking to their super funds, trying to get them to roll over into their products. So it's going in more than just selling insurances, it's now going into impersonation of clients just to get them to do the things they want them to do. So there's lots of cool, lots of bad things coming out of it.
But it's interesting, and I think it's deeper than anybody sort of thought would come out of it. But I guess at the end of the day, there's 10 and a half months to go, and on a serious note, if what we can get out of it is better customer outcomes and better consumer outcomes at the end of all of this, and the banks are held responsible for their actions, well, I think that's going to be a real win for the community. So that was the Royal Commission that rolls along. I'm going to touch on two articles that we've come across in the last little while, which is touching on the negative gearing. Now, there's pros and cons for negative gearing, and people arguing that it should be abolished and people arguing that it should be kept. So, abolishing negative gearing to address housing affordability, the Grattan Institute came out on Smart Property Investment Forum to argue the fact that it should be abolished, and their chief executive John Daly came out and said neglectful governments over the last 2 decades has created what he considers to be a current housing affordability mess. He pointed to the high capital gains tax discounts, negative gearing and the limited age pension asset tests as the main problems. And what he proposed as the solution was to build an extra 50,000 homes per year for a decade. So he wants 500,000 homes additionally to be built, and that will put 5% to 20% downward pressure on where property prices would be without those extra properties being built. He also wanted state governments to adjust the rules on building, so he wanted to make it easier for people to build within local governments and local suburbs, and some interesting information came out on that in the last few days as well. And he wanted to reduce capital gains tax discount or the discount to 25% and abolish negative gearing and include owner-occupied housing in the age pension asset tests, and that would reduce demand for property. So I guess when I read this, I just think he wants to have more stock, so he wants 50,000 more properties per year, which will have a 5 to 20% downward pressure on property prices, and then remove the incentives for people to be investing in property. I guess my mind just asks the question, who is building the 50,000 extra properties if there's a 20% downward pressure on property prices? Who's making money out of the building of the properties if investors aren't making the money out of it? I'm just not sure But my question, Munzrul, to you without notice, and I'm sorry, including the owner-occupied home of pensioners in the asset testing, how will that have a downward pressure on home prices?
Yeah, look, it's both the supply and the demand side of it is what we're sort of considering, right? And what they're sort of saying is that with the negative gearing side of it is that all that tax incentive being received with the negative gearing over the period of the time, that sort of creates that sort of the artificial demand for the investors to sort of purchase the property because of the tax benefit side of it, right? The 25% reduction is a classic example that when the investors sell it, we didn't have that 50% reduction at a point of time. We had a concept called indexation of the value. So whatever you purchased with the CPI, your purchase price increased, the difference, the gain is very, very taxed as opposed to 50%. So where the asset testing sort of coming through is that what they're saying is that the principal place of residence is, from a pension perspective, is being an exempt asset with some conditions attached to it, and there are some exemptions attached to it, exceptions as such. So a typical example would be is that people sort of owning properties over a generation, over years, and the value as such. So I suppose the article is sort of raising is that if we take away some of those sort of an incentive, we're just creating a bit more pressure on the price.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. And the next article was why negative gearing is necessary, and that was a Smart Property Investment article as well, and it was written by John Linden, who is a property author and a property investment expert, and he had some sound points, and he said, for many generations our government accepted responsibility for providing and maintaining basic essential community services such as power, water, hospitals and education. In this way, it is through taxation system that society as a whole subsidised the cost of housing for those who could not afford to buy or pay market rent. So they created social housing that was government funded. And in the last couple of decades, the governments have sold off and privatised many of the public assets and relinquished their responsibility to providing the services of affordable housing. Instead, they introduced a number of measures to encourage private investment in housing to fill that void. And one of those is obviously negative gearing. So he goes on, but his argument is that rather than the government having sole responsibility for social housing and making rent affordable, he basically is saying that the government is subsidising through taxation, negative gearing and as such, that people would provide rent, we would want to invest, and we would provide rent at a reasonable price for people. And he goes on to say that a shortage of rental accommodation would have upward pressure on rents, and then people will start pointing the finger to say there's lurks and perks here in regards to investors getting these benefits, so let's abolish them. But he says they'll want to abolish or at least cut back. They may need to realise that negative gearing is a subsidy providing lower rents than people would otherwise pay. They also need to understand that investors are not charities, and they will seek to maintain their cash flow by increasing rents if negative gearing is abolished. The abolishment of negative gearing will hit those who need affordable housing the most, resulting in an outcome which is the exact opposite of what they intended. So he's basically saying that if negative gearing is abolished, rents will go up. And I think, for me, I think that people would like to be able to do that, but in all situations, I don't think that is certainly possible. But Munzrul, what's your thought on that?
The comment which I want to say is that history has a way of repeating itself very often, right? So we look back in the sort of the mid-80s and we see that, well, we tried that with Bob Hawke and Paul Keating as being the treasurer at that stage. We tried that in sort of 85 or so, the negative gearing was being taken away. Now, the impact was exactly what he just explained, that while the negative gearing was being taken away, that there was not a whole lot of construction of the new supply was on the market. So while the supply wasn't there, naturally means that the population sort of grows on its own pace. So we've got more sort of the renters, so to speak, and involving the more renters, the rent sort of increased. And there were effects such as that people used to bid about the rent as such, as opposed to bidding to buy. right? People used to share the rooms, and these are sort of real examples as such. So the whole reason why the negative gearing was to take away was to improve the sort of the overall the life standard. It had a counteractive result as such. Then subsequent to this, the government sort of looked through and says, well, that didn't really work. So what the government did is that the government has taken away that abolition of the negative gearing. And the impact was, from an ATO, from a tax point of view, is that because those losses could not be claimed over 2 or 3 years, the loss gets collected, accumulated.
Yeah.
So as soon as that benefit is being taken away, everyone could claim of 3 or 4 years of negative gearing expenses into one hit. So all of a sudden ATOs sort of had fundamentally no revenue for about a year to year and a half, and everyone looks back and say that, well, that was quite a debacle.
Yeah. The thing that I think about with his article is I don't think anybody's trying to give social housing aspects. If you're a property investor, you're trying to get as much rent as you can for your properties. But the argument is if you abolish negative gearing, people are going to try and put up rents. That's the real argument, I think, is what's going to happen. And not in all cases is it going to be possible, but while there's huge demand, people will put up their rents if possible. The next two articles are really looking at APRA and their crackdown on investment lending. And the first article is through Domain, and they're talking to the point that the fact that there's been a significant drop-off in construction pipeline. So there's lots of cranes in the sky at the moment, but according to the Bureau of Statistics, what's following on from this glut that we're sort of seeing hit the market now is minimal development happening. And the argument that they're putting forward is that developers are actually waiting to see APRA remove some of these restrictions so they know they've got buyers for property that's going to come on the market. So, I mean, my thought with this one is really, I think developers are waiting to see what happens over the next 6 to 12 months when we see a lot of properties come onto the market. And I think they would like to see the market absorb a lot of the stock before they actually go and add to that. They want to get maximum bang for their buck. So the argument to think that developers are waiting for APRA to change rules, I probably don't necessarily agree with that, but I certainly think they're waiting to clear some stock to have high demand again for property of that style.
Yeah, but I think, you know, they may reduce their caps. They may reduce this 10% cap they've got on growth because it's irrelevant now, and they may take away the cap on the interest-only lending because it's running at about 15%, lowest it has in a long time. So that will become irrelevant. But the things that aren't going to change overnight is the tighter lending policies, and we're seeing with the Banking Royal Commission, a lot of the stuff that's happening at the moment is the banks are actually getting tighter. As brokers, the information and the amount of information that we're getting asked now on a file is 10 times what it was 18 months ago. The level of detail is unbelievable. You know, for a 20 grand cash out, they're looking for evidence of what you're using the money for, where, you know, we used to be able to get 300,000 or 400,000 future investment purposes, no worries. So it's, yeah, it is, that is the thing that's not going to change very quickly is more the borrowing guidelines.
Thanks, Ross. You've led me right into my next article, which is APRA hints credit easing for investors sooner rather than later. And basically, it's an article that outlines the fact that APRA has actually gone to the House of Representatives and they've told them that Australia's in a position now to remove some of the speed bumps that they put in place to control investment lending. So what he had said was, the APRA chairman, Wayne Breeze, said the 10% investment growth benchmark imposed on lenders in December 2014 is becoming redundant. And he's basically just what Ross had said. The fact that the lending has tightened up so much and there's so much stricter lending controls and there's the new credit control coming in the next few months as well, they're comfortable now that lenders are better prepared to lend, so they can lift some of these caps. While it won't free up, you know, more lending to investors in terms of credit loosening, what it will do is it will mean that lenders have a certain pool of funds that they want to lend. At the moment, they're capped at how much of that can go towards the investment side of their growth of their book. So they're restricted in how much of this pool of money can go to investors. What this will do is it will free it up so it's a fair game again. Banks have plenty of money and they want to lend. So this will actually free them up, and we won't see instances like we saw last year where Suncorp got to the 30th of the month and didn't settle a deal because it was going to push them over, over a cap. You had to wait till the next month to settle it. So what you will see, hopefully, is some better pricing. What you will see, hopefully, is a little bit looser, in terms of them trying to split that pool of funds that they've got to lend. So that was interesting. The next one's really a question for the panel, I guess. When they come up, they can talk to this a little bit, but it's a real estate article, so they're trying to talk up the market, but they are quoting some CoreLogic data, and really what they're talking about is that Sydney as a whole has obviously dropped over the last 12 months about 2.1%, but in March that had reduced to 0.3%. So what CoreLogic, Tim Lawless, that we know and like, made the comment that basically, if it continues like this, we'll be back to a growth within months. So to me, that seems way too short, but I'd like maybe the panel can address that when they're up here, but it just seems non-feasible. You're kind of just thinking that Sydney's going to be flat or dropping this year sort of thing, but this article is talking it up, saying get into Sydney now before it goes up again. So I'm not sure about that one. The next one, and I know the panel will definitely touch on this, but it's really quite exciting, I think, when you're talking about where opportunities are. And it says thousands of home owners or thousands of owners on narrow blocks set to benefit under New South Wales government changes to the housing code. And this is big, and we saw Gladys, I don't know if you saw Gladys in front of the news over the last couple of days talking this up, and basically what it's talking to is some changes to policies and to the housing code. And what it says is, under the new medium density housing code announced last week, duplexes, terraces and manor houses can be approved as complying developments in as little as 20 days, which is actually down from closer to 3 months for DAs to come through some councils and longer in other councils. And this is skipping the development application process. Blocks need only to be 12 metres wide for a duplex now, overriding the existing frontage requirements of 15 to 20 metres in places like Ryde and things like that. So that is really a huge change. And the Ryde councillor is blowing up, thinking that they're going to be slums in our inner suburbs now. So he's not happy about it. But a planning development principal, Max Fruger, said it's really just bringing, antiquated old rules back into fitting in with where we're at in terms of a population now, and it's a common sense requirement of our of where we're at the moment. But what I guess is exciting for me thinking about that is that experts are saying that duplex friendly blocks are worth 10 to 30% more than a site that you can't actually put a duplex on. So when I think about that, and I think about using some friends to find these types of properties, if you give them a strict guideline on what you're looking for, the fact that this is new and the fact that you might be able to pick up properties at current values, if it's Sydney medium house price of $1 million and you're talking about 20% more value, you're talking about $200,000 more value by the fact that you can put a duplex on some of these sites. So when we're talking about with these guys in terms of where we can make money in the current property market, it's about understanding rules, it's about understanding zoning, it's about understanding changes as they come on and potentially be in front of the game in terms of understanding a true value of a property as opposed to what somebody's willing to sell it to you for. So this is exciting to me because it opens up opportunities of potential sites that you might be able to buy under market value, but the market thinks that's what the value is, and that's where the skill of being able to make money in a market like Sydney comes now, and using help to help you find those types of properties. Any comments on any of that, Munzrul?
I think Paul and we had quite a bit of chat, and Paul, he sort of suggested that there is a bit of a checklist, and you've done quite a bit of research on your own, so I might just hand over to Paul in terms of comments.
Yeah, so
The panel, let's leave it for the panel.
A few other things in different markets to talk about.
Deb, did you want to have this is Deb, this is one of our business partners, so Deb wanted to say a quick thing about the forms in front of you.
Hi everyone, I'm Deb, for those of you who don't know me. We just want to take 2 minutes now, because we always say we'll do this and we never actually do it, because there's just so much good content that nobody wants to stop talking. So if I can just ask, if you didn't receive an email invitation for tonight and you want to be added to the list to receive emails, if you can put the details in that form. And everybody has one of these in front of them. It's really just for us to gauge some feedback on what you want to hear about, what you enjoy hearing about, and obviously if you're looking for an opportunity to talk to a buyer's agent, one of the brokers, or like some accounting advice. So we're going to pause literally for 60 seconds and just get some details from everybody, so we know, what else you'd like to hear about. So most things are on the table, but just give us some feedback, that'd be great. Thank you.
And Paul, if we may invite you. An absolute privilege to invite Paul. Paul, I'll read through the notes. Paul is a passionate property investor. He's also the director of Pure Property Investment, helping others realise their property investment dreams. He has a sizable personal property portfolio and is often quoted in industry media. Paul is also on the board of PIPA. On a personal basis, I know Paul over a number of years. Paul, I have the privilege of being his accountant, and I purchased a number of properties from Paul as well. I can say on a personal basis, he's great. Some of the properties that he bought have done very well over the last year or so, and in some of the areas they don't even have a lot of knowledge. So it's an absolute privilege to have Paul in there.
All right. I'll welcome Jackie. So Jackie's from House Search Australia. She's a buyer's agent, been in the game for many years. 2005 was your original, and you've been in real estate.
I've been investing since 1991.
1991. So exactly. So sure, you can tell us what's happened over those, and you've probably seen similar markets to those markets that we're in today. So Jackie and I have worked with some mutual clients, and over the years you've got some fantastic results and a real personalised service that you provide for your clients. So it's a credit to you and to your team. You also do some training for REBA and
Real Estate Institute.
Yeah, the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales, and you've been on the board of the REBA, which is the buyers agency.
So the Real Estate Buyers Agents Association of Australia. It's the only industry body for buyers agents. So I was president from 2012 to 2016.
So excellent. So we've got a really, really experienced panel. So we'll leave Munzrul to introduce Christine.
Christine, if I may invite Christine. Again, an absolute personal privilege to invite Christine. Christine and Wade being our client over many, many, many years. Many years. They've been one of our sort of really early clients. We've become friends over time. And Christine, I still remember a number of years ago, there was a bit of a change in profession. Munzrul, I'll try the buyer's agent, see how we go. And it's amazing to see how far you sort of come across that along the way. Yeah. So Christine started working her career as a lawyer, but quickly discovered her passion in property investment. She's now a director of Buy Right Buyers Agency. Christine gets a kick out of teaching clients the fundamentals of property investing, motivating them and empowering them to take the first step. And I think that last comment is very, very, very important, because Christine, you made a conscious decision from your point of view that it's sort of more very personalised, not that many transactions you are to some extent by yourself, but at that sort of a mom and dad sort of the investors level that is sort of provide. Now, saying all of those is that your acquisition that I've seen over the years are not limited to one state. So I've seen your acquisition in New South Wales, in Queensland, in different places. So welcome to the group, and looking forward to all the questions.
I might just get Jackie, seeing you do work with a number of buyer's agents. Do you want to just, what is the role of a buyer's agent, and what should we be looking for, engaging a buyer's agent?
Sure. So, who here has used a buyer's agent in the room, first of all? Okay, quite a few people. So, probably don't need to go through too much what the role of a buyer's agent is. But essentially, sellers hire vendors' agents to sell their assets. Buyer's agents hire buyers to purchase theirs, in a nutshell. And the role of buyer's agents is quite different to selling agents, even though we're in the same industry. Buyer's agents have been in Australia since the mid-90s. However, a lot of consumers don't know what they do. So, the role of a great buyer's agent is to take your brief, to search for you, locate and negotiate on your behalf, and to help you through the process. And hopefully get the very best outcome, very best price for you as well. So, and choosing a good buyer's agent, I think it's a very personal choice. You really need to engage with someone that you can trust, because we are your advocate. We're working on your behalf. It's really important that you have that rapport and that trust relationship built up. Secondly, that you engage someone with really good local knowledge in the area that you're looking in. And thirdly, someone that has the runs on the board and the experience. So always ask for client testimonials and phone numbers of recent clients. I think that's really important. Yeah.
Okay.
And Christine, if I may, from your point of view, perhaps a little bit about yourself from your end, and where are you investing at the moment, how are the market, and what are the things that you are looking for as a buyer's agent?
Yeah. Well, I learned about buyer's agencies many years ago when I first started investing, and we used a buyer's agent for our first 4 properties. Then I had children and decided that being a lawyer was not going to be good for the family, so I went in and became a buyer's agent myself because I had such a passion for property. Learnt many lessons over the years on building a portfolio that negative gearing wasn't a good strategy if we wanted to keep going. Then we changed our strategy with the help of Munns. Munns has our almost quarterly meetings to keep us on track, and it's really important that one of the lessons we learnt was to surround yourself with a team of experts that can help you get to your goals. As long as you discuss your goals, get the strategies, and then they'll help you to get to your goals quicker. Then we changed our strategy to positively geared property. That has allowed us to increase our serviceability, to build our portfolio, and also that sleep at night factor. My husband and I aren't huge risk takers, so for us having positively geared properties allowed us to be able to sleep at night knowing that our properties were paying for itself. What was the rest of the question? Tell me about yourself and then
Some of the investments that we're doing at the moment, and where are some of the recent acquisition and why?
Okay, a lot of my clients have sub 500 or a lot sub 400 budgets, so that's very limiting in terms of areas. Sydney's obviously out of the question for a lot of those investors. A lot of the investors still want growth and cash flow. So the areas that I'm looking at, I'm licensed up in Queensland as well, so a lot of southeast Queensland, so from Moreton Bay, Ipswich, Logan, those sorts of areas have got a great mix of properties, so no matter what your strategy, there are properties there for you. So whether it's buy and hold, so you sort of set and forget kind of properties. If you're looking for a value add properties, so your renovators, if you're looking for value add with granny flats, if you're looking for subdivisions, I think Paul gave a few examples at the last meeting of a subdivision potential, I think, in Kalinga. So they're the sorts of areas that I'm looking at for those clients. So lower risk, it's almost like picking up and putting sort of Blacktown up there, where you've got everything from Doonside through to the pond. So you've got a huge array of properties, and no matter what your strategy that you've worked out with your accountant or financial advisor, there's those sorts of properties in there. Plus, with that value add potential, that's where a lot of clients are making their money at the moment. So it may not necessarily be in movements in the market yet, because it's in its growth phase, but it's in that adding value to properties. So whether it's a renovator and then being able to revalue and pull out money, or if it's adding a granny flat to add in huge cash flow, or the subdivisions, which a lot of Paul's clients are doing up there, buying larger blocks in councils that are subdivision friendly.
I suppose, Paul, from your point of view as well, is that you've showcased a couple of properties for us in the last information evening, and right at the end we'll go through some of the practical examples from Jackie and Christine and from Paul. But from your perspective, Paul, which are the market that you're sort of investing, which are the market that you're sort of acquiring on behalf of the client?
Yeah, it's a really broad mix for us, depending on where we're at, what we're doing. I mean, that team's here as well. So Lena and Scott and myself were property tragics through and through, and I was just telling Munzrel and Ross, I literally just got finance approval for a development I'm doing in Cronulla at the moment, which has taken me an awfully long amount of time, and all the information that I think Scott and Ross have alluded to with regards to how the Royal Commission is going to be putting pressure on literally what I need to submit. I've submitted more loan submissions personally than I can care to count. But ultimately, this last one was probably like doing everyone all over again. And it's not an exaggeration. I mean, literally, the guys I'm dealing on the phone with my broker and a couple other brokers yelling at people all day, every day, saying this is absolutely ridiculous. And so I digress a bit. But I mean, ultimately, I think the beauty about Australia, and I say this very regularly, is that we're never a linear property market. We're never going to be a market that moves in one direction. And even though a market such as Sydney's sort of seen the press change its tone very quickly, where it was the darling of the Australian property market, Sydney's all of a sudden become the dark reaper that hangs over everyone's head because they're over leveraged and can't afford to hold their property. But there's still opportunities. I mean, we've done a full assessment of the change in the housing code and where opportunities potentially lie all of a sudden out of nowhere. But where we're buying, really it's a mix depending on where we're trying to achieve an outcome for a client. But really, from high cash flow assets, we're seeing some really good opportunities right across southeast Queensland in certain markets, certain property types. I think the units, villas, townhouses probably get a bigger rap than they probably deserved about 2 or 3 years ago. And I think probably there's a bit of oversight in certain investors' detail as far as cash flow. Unfortunately, people chose to look at gross yield numbers a little bit too frequently, and probably seeing that the true cash flow on properties in those markets really not providing anything, definitely no rental growth, and if anything, a bit of softening. So cash flow wise, there are still markets there, but they're definitely the freestanding housing markets in our opinion. Hobart's still providing strong rental growth. Amazingly enough, we've seen in the last probably 12 months, and even more recently in the last 3 or 4 months, in certain markets in Hobart, you've seen anywhere between probably 8 and 15% rental growth in a value as far as that's concerned, in addition to 5 to 15% in capital growth. But that's a market for cash flow. If we're talking to that $300,000 to $600,000 price point, we're seeing really good opportunities, I think, still across the southeast Queensland markets. Understanding zoning in each local council in Queensland is probably a little bit more difficult than it is in New South Wales, because there is a lot more local environmental plans specific to a local council which needs to be understood there. But I think granny flats are probably a tougher proposition these days, because we're seeing a lot of gazetting changing in local councils out there. But subdivisions, big opportunity along main infrastructure pipelines, rezoning markets, and looking at potentially also opportunities a little bit further north now towards the Sunshine Coast areas. We've seen some really good opportunities up there starting to present themselves. And I think personally Perth's probably still at least 9 to 12 months away, as much as it's starting to get a bit of a rap for some investors. Melbourne, I think we're still in a pretty similar position to where we were, to where Sydney is now, where it's starting to see its crescendo, and probably going to go into a little bit of a hibernation for another 2 to 4 years. And we haven't invested in Adelaide and don't intend to.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So, wide variety. I suppose one of the comments which I sort of collect from your sort of note is that in terms of the zoning and some of the zoning changes, so we'll speak about New South Wales a little bit later on, but if I might just pick up the Queensland and sort of the zoning change. So, Christine, there were some recent changes which are yet to come in.
Yeah, well, in talking about the granny flats, so people have purchased, I had a client who purchased a property that was on 700, just over 700 squares, and a certain metre frontage, and then all of a sudden, post purchase, the local council had then reduced your ability to build a granny flat, and it had to be, I think it was 18 metre frontage, minimum of 700 squares. Luckily theirs was, but another person I knew bought one slightly less. Then luckily there's some granny flat specialists and some builders that we know up there that have kind of gone into that. There are a few more changes that were gazetted. They wanted to decrease the frontage to 15 metres, and then they wanted extra council contributions and things like that. So luckily they've gone into that, and it looks like they've actually reduced that council contribution by about 50%, and the frontage I think has gone back to what
It's 15.
it is 15 metres,
Yeah.
which they wanted to reduce that even more. So even when you're buying properties, things can change afterwards, which can seriously affect what you do. So sometimes it might be mindful that if you do buy something with the potential to get in there straight away, get what you want done, so that if there are any council changes. So it's having your ear to the ground, having local builders who are on top of that as well up there, giving you that inside knowledge, saying these can potentially come in to effect in July. We really need to get things actioning now, get it built, get the approval done, etc., so that we're not going to be under those changes. So even buying properties, you can still, unfortunately,
And I
have the
suppose the
changes
question,
straight
the
after.
business case needs to be there, right? So I can go through to my properties and I can see that I've built a number of granny flats, and there were a couple of granny flats which were fantastic. It worked out well and it was perfect, right? Particularly if you have a corner block, you can just have a little bit of fence and it appears to be two sort of dwelling from the tenant's perspective, right? And I can give an example of a granny flat that even my builder sort of said that, well, you sort of can, based on the council's requirement, but perhaps you probably should not be. It's just the commercial viability isn't there. And I said that, well, I looked through the numbers and said, numbers make sense, let's do it, right? We've done it. And it's a granny flat which is hidden right at the end of the whole complex. I've got no visual from the street, right? And there is even not sort of enough sort of an access as such. And finding the tenant was a nightmare. And I can see that it would be a nightmare all the time, right? So while the numbers sort of on their face value looks pretty good, but it's the practicality, it's the business case needs to be looked into as well.
And then is the sale price of that property going to be worth what you paid for it? So, it's definitely. So, very interesting. And I guess from your point of view, Jackie, you've been in the market, you said you've been investing since the 90s. So you want to give us a bit of, what you've seen over the time that you've been investing, and then, a little bit of an overview about you and your business. Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing about today's market, which really differentiates it from past markets, are the low interest rates. Like our first loan, I think, was 12.5%, and that was a bargain. That was actually a subsidised loan at the time. Now, can you imagine paying 12.5% interest on the property that you have at the moment? It really will change the market when interest rates do go up. Not that there's anything on the horizon, I realise that, I recognise that. But I think, as investors, we naturally spend up to our absolute limit. And I think a lot of the tightening around credit has been responsible tightening, wouldn't you say, in some aspects? Because we are not the United States of America. We're not giving loans to homeless people on the streets. I think Australian financiers and credit have been quite responsible. And that has allowed Australians to be somewhat shielded from the fallout as opposed to other countries. But I've seen a lot of changes, obviously, a lot of cycles. My first investor property that I bought was $125,000 in Sydney, Penrith. Long time ago, I think it was getting $150 a week rent. That doesn't happen anymore. That same house would be around $800,000 and probably lucky to get $500 a week rent. So the market has changed. Yes, yields have dropped, but also interest rates have. And I think you've got to look at the total return when you're looking at property, not just looking at gross yield, as Paul said, and I agree with that. You've got to look at the net yield figure, but you've also got to look at your real costs. Because 12.5% versus 4% interest rates are completely different and changes the playing field. But I suppose over time, as an investor, and some of the points that we've made about being practical too, like we talk about, the practical aspect of tenants, is always put yourself in the tenant's shoes. And I think, too much time is spent on, it's just about the numbers. Well, it's not just about the numbers. Somebody's going to be living in that property. You don't have to necessarily say, okay, I'm happy if I'm living here, but you have to consider the tenant's needs, and also would they be happy in a damp, dark, underground apartment, even if the numbers look good. So there's a lot to consider. A lot to consider.
So a bit of an overview about your business and the types of clients and what's a bit of a.
So we help a combination Paul, we actually have a lot of homeowners. I would say at the moment our spread's about 50-50. So investors, obviously, we have helped since 2005. We've bought for hundreds and hundreds of them. And because we only focus on Sydney, we know Sydney quite well. We don't go outside of the areas that we know, that we have that specific experience and knowledge in. But I really, with investors, it is a much easier transaction because most investors come to us and know what they want and they have a predetermined budget. With homeowners, of course, who here owns a home? You know how long it took you and how emotional the process can be. But a buyer's agent can be really helpful with homeowners too. We actually form that, that division between emotion and common sense sometimes in getting a good buyer.
So
Yeah.
you're a counsellor between your
Yeah,
husband
yeah.
and wife as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes you are the counsellor. I have to tell a funny story here. I actually had a couple who used to argue about nearly every house that we shortlisted for them. And in the end, the wife won, the girl. But we found this house that ticked all the boxes, literally ticked all the boxes. And he said, "Oh, I'm not sure, maybe we should consider this or that." And she stood her ground and she said, "We are going to buy this house, come hell or high water, or I'm divorcing you." And this was in front of us, and it was like, whoa. So yeah, very, very emotional home buyers, but yeah, it's always a learning curve and interesting. I love what I do.
Oh, definitely.
I suppose, Jackie, the question sort of comes into my mind. So for me, as a sort of as an investor, right? So I'm looking at the value, and what's the definition of the value? I understand it's relative, and I go back in the history and I sort of say, well, we used to use a rule of thumb of 5% return. Does it even exist anymore, that 5% return? Because the inflation is a lot lower, and if the inflation is lower, is it 5% or that needs to be revised a little bit lower? But I look back into the return from an investor's point of view and I sort of say that, well, I look back into the previous cycle, say 2003 when it was the peak, hardly you had about 2.25, 2.5% return, I'm generalising, hardly as gross. I look into the market now and I sort of say, depending on where it is, it's about 3 to 4% is sort of the return. So as an investor, I suppose that if I'm willing to invest in Sydney, because I say at the end, Sydney is metropolitan, Sydney is the population growth, longer term, I want to invest in Sydney. Where do I invest?
And that's the golden question, isn't it? I think the question more is there are opportunities in every market. It's how you buy, okay? And do you buy well? That's where you make your profit, in the buying. If you buy well, there are opportunities in every market. And also the type of property, okay? So as when we're talking to investors, most of the investors that we tend to work for go for older stock. They don't go for off the plan, they don't go for new property, okay? They go for your traditional bread and butter 3-storey walk-up units, okay, in good solid blocks that have low fees, that have been well maintained and that are going to give them a consistent return, okay? Something that's value add, I think, is also really important. And if you can find something that's got something that's a little bit unique. So for example, even in an old 3-storey walk-up here in Parramatta, if you're getting a ground floor that has more of a courtyard and a yard, that's going to be more appealing than something that's just bog standard in the block.
Absolutely, and I suppose the point which I take is the value add is the point that I take, and whether we use value add, whether we say manufacturing the growth, right? So you've got two different elements. You've got the natural growth, whether it's the manufacturing growth. So Paul, I'm quite inquisitive from my mind in terms of the New South Wales, the zoning and sort of the narrow blocks. And I know you and I spoke, you've got a bit of a check list and you've got a whole lot of sort of comments. So I'd be quite curious to know what are the changes, what are the fundamental things that I'm sort of looking forward to, and what are the planning opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing, if you've got a sheet in front of you, we've done about a 3.5-page real synopsis of about a 67-page change of the motor medium density planning scheme that came out about 2 weeks ago. So if you do want a copy of it, happy to email it through and you can have a good look through it, because this basically goes through 67 pages condensed down to 3, and you can go and take it as you wish and apply it over any different measures there. But long and short of it, anyone who owns a house in New South Wales, does that house 12 metres frontage, hands up, keep your hand up if it's more than 12 metres frontage, keep your hands up if it's more than 400 square metres. essentially you can build a dual occupancy as long as your local council now overrides or complies with the new local environmental planning scheme for a dual complying development. So essentially 20-day approval. Keep your hand up if you've got 15 metre frontage and you've got 600 square metres. So potentially now, as long as your local environmental plan from your local council is in conjunction with the New South Wales planning scheme, you can potentially build 4 flats on your house as a complying development. So essentially, you can put 4 2-bedroom flats, 80 square metres a flat, 600 square metres, minimum 15 metre frontage on that. If you've got that same house which has got 80 metre frontage and you've got still 600 square metres, you can build terrace housing, minimum 6 metre width. So you can all of a sudden now put on that same house, 80 metre frontage, 600 square metres, rectangular, you can build 1, 2, 3, minimum per dwelling, or minimum around about 200 square metres per property, as long as it complies with your local council as well. Complying development. And this is, I think, to what Scott was talking about. When we're coming up to an election in about a year's time, we're talking about negative gear and we're talking about the issue with housing affordability. This is the answer that I think really they're not telling us is one of the answers, especially in Sydney and New South Wales, is it's going to create supply. Now, it's going to create opportunity. Absolutely undisputedly there is opportunity for people to make money, but it is going to allow so much more supply. And that supply is going to literally create a softening in the market. We can refute it as much as we want, but we're going to create more property. We still have the population growth, but there's just going to be more property there. Now, how we incentivise developers to want to build these is the key, but I think anyone who owns a property now, any homeowners who own a property now, they're the ones in the box seat. It's not the people who are going to buy next. It's that if you've got exposure to the Sydney market now, you're the ones that have really got a good uptick in what's going to be available to you, as long as you fit into some of these controls. Because if you're close to amenity and you can fit into any one of those 3 things, and you're happy to live in a duplex, you're happy to live in a terrace, or you're potentially happy to live in a flat, and you have enough equity and/or cash flow, there's a huge opportunity coming everyone's way within the Sydney market, within the Central Coast market, within the Wollongong market, within the Newcastle market, within any market that complies with these controls, essentially low to medium density R2 zoning. You've got a huge opportunity all of a sudden to really find that. The only real caveat, and the biggest caveat I see to it right now, is development in Sydney in general is as expensive by a country mile than it's ever been, and it is ridiculously expensive to get something built comparatively to what it should be. And it's not necessarily the materials, it's the labour. And that's where we have a big issue right now, is that even though these are changing, we've run our lens as an office over the last week and a half. We've tried to find opportunity in a ton of markets. We're trying to find it right now. We still can't really find it as far as there's a spot. And it still doesn't stack up to say average house price, let's call it flat 600 square metre block, it's going to be 800,000. We put a duplex, we all of a sudden see we've got our 15% margin. We put a terrace, we've got our 15% margin. We put a flat, we've got a 20% margin. It's still very, very difficult to find any market in New South Wales that this actually provides value, and mainly for the fact that building is so expensive. Crane Index came out a couple of days ago. We've still got the second most amount of cranes in the sky behind Dubai in Sydney as opposed to anywhere else in the world. It shows us that we've got a lot of construction jobs. So people, to prime off these high-paying construction jobs, they want a lot of money. And I'm quoting up 4 duplexes personally right now. It's astronomical. And this is where it comes down to right now, where I think, to your point, Jackie, buying right and buying absolutely understanding your margins and figuring out where there's an opportunity. I'll give you a personal example. This duplex development that I'm doing is 4 duplexes, 1 property that sits across 2 old titles which were amalgamated into 1. We're splitting it back out into 2, getting rid of the house, and then getting 2 different blocks subdivided to then build a duplex and a duplex. Essentially, we bought it probably about 24% below what those 2 blocks would have sold for individually, but there's money that has to be spent to get that subdivision done. It's still in council, it's going to happen, but it takes time, and it took a fair bit of risk to do so. But understanding that, then understanding the intrinsic value of that particular piece of land is really where the money's made. And until people are prepared to do that, I think applying something like a really good understanding of the local council and then the state government as far as their planning schemes, there's going to be money to be made, but you've got to be so familiar with how to do it beauty about this change is that a lot of people can do this with speed now, and that's what couldn't happen before. Is that 3 to 6 months?
I suppose the due diligence that you're sort of saying, right? So the due diligence sort of comes in my mind. So the way, I suppose, from my end as an accountant mind, is that how I do the due diligence is that I sort of see the project on its own merit as such. I sort of do a bit of a balance sheet and a profit and loss, so to speak, right? So I sort of say that, well, I've got this one portfolio as such, this one particular property, I've got just a very simple house. What's the asset value and what's the mortgage? So what's my net asset as of now? And then I sort of compare that, saying that, well, if I were to demolish this, and if I were to build, let's say, 2 or 4, what would be the end value of all of those 2 or 4 assets as such? And what is the end mortgage as such? So I've got my existing mortgage, then I've got my demolition cost, then I've got my holding cost, and naturally the construction cost as such. And the hidden one, I suppose, very often is the council contribution, right? How much is the council contribution depending on each council?
Always too much.
If you buy in Port Bay right now, they've got some council contribution exemptions for anyone thinking about developing out there, just FYI. When they want to incentivise development, they will alleviate it as wherever they can.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
So that's from the asset side of it, right? So we look through from that asset side of it, saying that, well, if that is the uplift of the value, what's the uplift of the mortgage, and what is the net asset? How much has my net asset has increased by doing that construction, one side. The second side, as far as I look through, is that why am I buying, or why am I investing this? Why am I demolishing this and constructing it? Is it because there is a duplex that I'm sort of building and I'm sort of living in that duplex? Am I renting into it, right? So I take the P&L side of it. I sort of say that, well, what's the rent at the moment, and what's the interest, what's the bottom line? How much is it costing me as is to hold it? And if I demolish all of those, I've got this new mortgage. What's my new cost in terms of the interest and the council and the water and all the rest? What's my new rent as such? Rather than having one rent, I've got 2 or 4. And what's the gap, right? So if you have higher level of sort of rental as such, so cash flow wise it's improving, brilliant. If you have a higher level of sort of capital growth, it makes sense. But the numbers need to be done, yeah?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's exciting, guys. I mean, I think that this is, for me, as a property nerd, I look at this stuff and we saw it come out in the office. We literally dropped everything we're doing for a week straight, and every morning our whips were basically consisting of running a lens over new markets, consisting of where, what, and how. And yeah, I think if nothing else, it creates an opportunity for people to see that there's always going to be opportunities in manufacturing.
Absolutely. So if I might just bring in Jeremy with the question that, Jeremy, you had a number of properties and in Geelong as an area. So you yourself purchased in Geelong a number of years ago, and you went through the whole process of sort of the council sort of the approval as such, and then you considered the due diligence.
Yeah, so I've there's one block in particular, a corner block in a place called Corio. I actually did the subdivision, subdivided the block into 2 lots. Went through the construction estimations with a couple of different builders, and just it worked out that I did the subdivision, paid it, but it worked out when I built it, there was actually no equity that I was creating. I was actually providing a house, maybe getting a little bit of additional rental income, but absolutely no equity I was creating. Went through with a real estate agent to look at what the value would be if I was to sell it. And it actually worked out that selling it profited close to about $160,000 in, say, 12 months after buying it. So it was very quickly, when I did the feasibility on either building it or selling it as is, the profit was actually about $160,000 difference. So that's just a little bit of feasibility. You need to do, sometimes it's better to maybe DA and sell rather than going through with just the actual construction. Plus, I didn't want to deal with builders in Geelong because they are a different breed of builders to what they are in Sydney. So that was always going to be a bit of a challenge, managing something from Sydney and manage it while they're in Geelong or in Melbourne. So that was a little bit what I went through, and I'm going through a duplex build in Sydney as well, in Leppington, and that was a challenge as well. My frontage, believe it or not, was only 12.9 metres, but I argued with the council that because we had to build 5 metres back, it was 18 metres in frontage. So you just kind of sometimes jump up and down a little bit more than what you're supposed to, and you can get things ahead. But these new planning amendments are really going to change the way the market is. It's really exciting, really, really exciting.
So again, I suppose the point which I take is that we look through the opportunity, but we go through and do the due diligence with each individual opportunity on their own set of circumstances. We can do it, which is brilliant. Does it make sense to do it, right? So I can give an example of New South Wales and Queensland. Based on the market what it is and based on the cycle what it is, I can give an example in New South Wales, one of my projects and the property that I bought from you in Climber Down, that I can demolish and build 2 triplets on both sides. The numbers are fantastic, both from capital growth as well as the cash flow side of it. I can give a similar example of, say, in Brisbane as such, that yes, I can demolish, I can build 3 or 4, but just the numbers are not there. There's not enough level of sort of additional growth or enough level of the cash flow as such. So you need to do the individual numbers.
So in terms of what we might do, because I want to spend some time on the examples and go through some of the property examples from the guys. This is an example for you, Jackie. So you want to talk us through this. Was this for a home buyer or an investor?
No, this was actually for an investor. So just to make you through, to go through the details. So this was a repeat client, an investor who has used our services before, probably about 6 years ago. And he basically, his strategy is, he lives overseas and he's a long-term buy and holder, but he only wants to buy land with freestanding houses on them. His strategy is very much buy the biggest piece of land that he can in the suburb at the lowest price that he possibly can, and also stick a tenant in it until he's ready to add value. Okay, so we were talking about dual occupancy, adding granny flats, etc. We've done quite a bit of that with our clients. I've been involved in a number of small lot subdivisions as well. And Jeremy, interesting. You're talking about whether or not to get the DA and sell it off. That's exactly what I did. I don't like dealing with builders either. So even if they're not from Geelong. But basically the brief for this client was he had a budget of $750 and he wanted something freestanding in the Kings Park, Quakers Hill, Marion area. And it took us a little while, but we came up with this corker, and this basically is the cheapest 4-bedroom house that's been sold in this suburb since the end of 2016. It was originally, we got under contract to another buyer for over 800. In fact, twice it was under contract. One actually pulled out buyer's remorse, which happens to all buyers, let me tell you. And another one was couldn't get the finance together. So we kind of launched straight in with a ridiculous offer and worked our way up from there. So we started lower than $730, insulting the vendor, but who cares? We're buyer's agents, and we did really well. So he was absolutely thrilled with this purchase. It's on approximately 630 square metres of land. In a fairly, owner-occupied suburb, which is quite important when we're talking about buying for investors. We have, a list of 12 criteria that we look at, and one of them is to actually buy in owner-occupied areas. We feel that's really important because you as owners are beautifying your own suburb and evaluating all the time. Whereas if you're buying in areas where there's a lot of investors, there's not that same incentive to do it. So we're really happy with this. It hasn't settled yet, so I can't actually give you the address, but I have given a little map there for those who know Kings Park. Probably figure it out if you're smart. Or you can just jump on the station so the address there. It comes up as the cheapest house. So really thrilled with this. It took us approximately 8 weeks of searching. We had a few other properties that offers were rejected. But as buyer's agents, our goal is to get the best price for the client, and we move on to the next property if we don't get that. So the Sydney market at the moment is, very segmented, as Paul alluded to before. It's not one market. Sydney never is and never will be one market. There are different areas and things going on that are very different. The east is very different to the North Shore, very different to Blacktown, to Hornsby, to the south. So you really need to know what is happening in an area to actually get the best outcome for the client. So we were thrilled with this. We think $730 in Sydney for a freestanding house is pretty damn good.
So is there any other particular areas or current deals that you've got going on at the moment that you want to share?
Yeah, well look, we have, as I said, buyers come to us with a brief, and yes, we can guide you through which suburbs are going to fit that brief and give you advice based on our recommendation. But I think it's important to note that we're buyer's agents, we're not licensed financial advisors. So whilst we can provide you with the information, ultimately as an investor, it's up to you to make the decision in the end. you've got to do your due diligence and research as well, and not just blindly trust someone to act on your behalf. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I know I've been presented a number of properties, and at the time, you don't go with it blindly just because you're given it. You need to do your own due diligence. I've said no to a number of properties before saying yes, and I think that comes down in your own gut feel for a property. I know the ones that I've been really excited about when I've purchased myself have been the ones that have been the best performers, right? So that you intrinsically know when there's a good deal and you found something.
Your
So
individual
yeah.
circumstances is very important as well, because
Yeah.
a particular property could be brilliant property, but your individual circumstances that perhaps is not the right fit in terms of your investment side of it as well, right? And also see each sort of investment property a little bit as a sort of a small business unit, so to speak. What's the goal of this particular property? What's the objective in the longer period of time? What's the exit plan?
Yeah.
Right, so a whole lot of things, whether it's a diversification in long term comes into account, whether it's a growth, whether it's a cash flow, whether it's a subdivision potential. What is the aim?
And yeah, everyone's personal financial situation is so different. You know, we've got clients that earn over $1 million, and we've got clients that earn, you know, $60,000. So the types of property and the ability for them to hold those negative cash flows is really different. So
Can I
yeah,
just add
yeah.
something to that too, which I think is really important, you know, having invested in property for so long, everyone has different stress levels and what they're willing to do. Like, you know, you talking about, you know, subdividing and building, that can really stress some people out and they're not going to go there. Whereas something that's bread and butter, sit and let it grow and have patience, you know, maybe put some money into it or do something small, that can be your sleep at night factor. And Christine touched on it. I think that's really important as investors. And what I've learned over a number of years is I've bought, renovated, sold, disposed, developed, I've done it all, okay? But at the end of the day, I need to be able to be comfortable with my level of debt, okay? And I think as Australians, we all go into way too much debt, sorry brokers, but I do. And also have a comfortable lifestyle, not pouring all of your money into your investments. You still need to have a life balance. I think that's so important. So if you're not into building and developing and you want to just buy an investment property for almost a forced savings plan, something that's going to grow, then that's what you need to do.
Yeah.
And I suppose, Jackie, one of the things which I do in my sort of personal circumstances is that I look through the mitigation factor.
Yes.
I look through what are the buffer. And I sort of say that, well, do I become as unpractical saying that what happens if the interest rate goes up to 14, 15, 17%? Perhaps they would not if the inflation is only about 2 to 3%.
Yes.
But at the same time, I've seen the interest rate going to 8 and 9%, and that's a genuine sort of a possibility at a point of time. Whether it's over the next few years or so, we don't know, right? So the question is that if the interest rate does increase to a certain percentage, what's the level of the stress test that I have for myself? If the tenant is not there, what's the level of the buffer that I have? So mitigation is important.
Absolutely, and talking about vacancy factors too, and I'll give you a personal example. I have a house in Brisbane at the moment. It's in a great spot in Brisbane, okay? I bought it back in 2004, okay? So I've had it for a long time, 14 years. Unfortunately, it hasn't doubled yet. I'm waiting. I love Brisbane, I used to live there, but anyway. Now, I have had this house rented for nearly the whole period that I've owned it. Up until 7 weeks ago, I have not been able to get a tenant for this property. I have dropped the rent, I have dropped the rent, I have dropped the rent, okay? So not every property is equal, and you do need to allow. So I'm losing $600 a week at the moment on that, okay? If you don't have a buffer, if you don't have a cash flow or a plan in place to allow for at least 6 weeks vacancy per year on your property, you're not being realistic. So that's just one example of having a buffer.
Beautiful.
All right, Christine, do you want to talk us through, there's a couple of properties that you provided to us, so you want to give us an example?
On the back of what
Yeah.
Jackie was actually
Yeah.
saying, when I sit down and I speak to clients, a big thing is about that risk factor. Are they risk adverse or are they pro risk? I remember when I first started investing and we got in the car, wasn't looking where we were going, and we pulled up in front of a house. And I looked out the window, I locked my door, and I said to my husband, I said, I am not getting out of the car. There is no way in hell. We're out at Mount Druitt. we're out at Lethbridge Park, and if only we'd bought 10 properties out there, and paid $195,000
There's
for.
pointer if you want the pointer.
Oh no, never.
Okay.
I was very risk adverse when we first started investing, but it wasn't until I started educating myself and going to seminars and reading and hanging out with people like Mums and Jeremy and good brokers that I learnt that it's okay to go into debt, as long as it's good debt, as long as it's a calculated risk, that it's what's in line with your risk factors as well. So my husband and I, we're not big risk takers, but we're happy to have some set and forgets. We're happy to do some small developments like granny flats. We're not into the big subdivisions, etc., because that's just not our risk factors at the moment. But a lot of my clients are new to property investing, so for them they want something that's simple. It depends on their ability to have the cash flow to renovate, their ability to put on granny flats and things like that. So as Jackson said, that you've got to look at the client, their specific circumstances, their risk taking, etc. So this example here, this was a client that was actually one of Jeremy's clients as well. He bought this property about 12 months ago for $314,000. It's in Eagles Landing, which is a nice park, probably similar to Kings Park, Kings Langley up in Queensland. 880 square block, but it was on a slope, so that turned off quite a few buyers, but we could see the potential that you could put a granny flat on it. This granny flat builder is an excellent builder. He was able to build it on a slope. He just finished that not long ago, about $144,000, and he gets about $650 a week.
It's actually going up.
Oh, is it?
It's 720.
Oh, 720. Well, there you go. He did when he put on the granny flat, one thing that when you get the construction loan for the granny flat, he added into the quotes and work to be done with the front house. So that's a few other things that you learn, tricks of the trade, so that you're not forking out a lot of cash. Then he added that to the construction cost of the granny flat to fix up a bit of the kitchen and things like that. So $720 a week rent. So his return on investment is fabulous. One of his, I think, Jeremy, his strategy, I think he's looking at cash flow.
He was the type of client that he went to a seminar about 6 years ago and was sold on negative gearing. So he went and bought Macquarie Park and all these other properties with significantly low yields, and his negative gearing was probably anywhere between $15,000 to $20,000 per year. And the last 2 or 3 acquisitions have really been about balancing his portfolio, and that property alone has actually turned his whole portfolio, where it was quite negative, into something quite neutral, and then adding a couple of those other cash flow positive properties where he's been able to do granny flats or buy it at a relatively low price, he now has a positive geared investment portfolio. So that's one of the things where he changed as his knowledge grew, and Christine helped him along the
That
way.
property, the other recent sales when he bought that were around that $340 to $350 for anything of that sort of block size. So it came down to me knowing the local agent, which is what buyers agents do, is they get to know the local agents intricately. So if a deal falls over, they know that we've got clients that have got finance pre-approved and ready to go, and they'll ring us up and say, hey, this one's fallen over, have you got anyone ready to go? And that was the example of that one. I secured another one in the same suburb yesterday. This one we managed to get over the line. Our offer was a little bit less than what other people were offering, but the owners of it have got an extended settlement on their purchase, so we were happy to rent it back to them. So that was an incentive. So when it comes to buying, right, it's not only the price but also the terms. So if you can get good terms on it as well, so we've got a tenant in there for the next 3 to 6 months while they finish their other purchase. So that one's, they've got granny flat potential on it. This client, they've got, what they did was that they meet with their financial advisor. They've got superannuation coming in. They've looked at the long term, what that superannuation is going to be, and they've realised that their goal is, say for example, to have $2,500 a week. They've realised that they're going to have a shortfall of maybe nearly $1,000 from their superannuation. So a way for them to fund that shortfall in that lifestyle that they want in retirement is through property. So for them, it's trying to find properties that have that granny flat potential and that cash flow potential, so that when they eventually retire, they'll own those properties outright, and they'll be able to have that cash flow. For them, it's hopefully only 2 or 3 properties that will have granny flats on them that will have that cash flow for them. So an important part as a buyer's agent is knowing what their long-term strategies are and knowing each purchase whether that is going to help them achieve their end goals as well.
Interesting. Is that in a self-managed super fund? Because you mentioned the super there.
No, this one's outside the super fund, but it will help them in retirement. I own that one outright, and that cash flow will help them in retirement. This other one up the top, I think this one's a new investor. They've got very low risk. They're the sort of people that they just wanted a set and forget type property. So this one's only, I think it was a 2009 build. So it's still got the bonus of some depreciation as well. It's 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2-car garage in the Ipswich region, a suburb called Brassel. It's only 2 minutes drive to the M2. It's got a Woolworths going into the estate in the next 12 months. Close to all the factors for growth. So it's got infrastructure, schools, population growth. So the Ipswich region, I think it's forecast to grow by another 250,000 over the next 13 years. So population, increase in demand in properties. Bought it for $320,500 and it's got a rental return of $370 a week. So for them it's neutral to slightly positive based on their individual circumstances. So when it comes to working out cash flow, everyone's going to be different depending on what the interest rate is on the loan. So as you would know, depending on who their lender is, so if it's a big bank it could be 3 point or 4 point something.
Yeah.
But if they can't get those sort of loans, they could be through Liberty or Pepper, and
they're
the
high
interest rates are a
fives,
bit
yeah,
higher.
yeah.
So that will affect obviously the overall cash flow. When I'm looking at properties, I not only take into account the interest rates they're paying, but also things like council rates, water rates, landlord insurance, their property management fees. So you can see the approximate cash flow or if it's the opposite, how much it's going to cost to hold that property every week.
Yeah,
which is
which
really important in Sydney.
yeah.
So if you've got a property that's in a high growth area, but if it's going to cost you $200 a week, do you have that cash flow to be able to sustain 1, 2, 3, 4 properties?
Yeah, and it's important. I know for my properties in Queensland, the rates for investors are actually, almost double what you would pay in Sydney, and even strata fees up there seem to be a lot higher. So it's those added costs. It's not just the gross return as we were talking about, because the added cost can make a big difference to your holding cost for the property. And I was looking at an option for a client today. We were doing a portfolio review. If he refinanced to one of those second tier lenders, his rate was going to go to 5.94. If he was to stay with his existing lender, he could have a fixed rate of 4.19. So, on a mortgage, that's about 1.75% difference. And that's a huge cost in terms of a holding cost. So it's great that you as a buyer's agent are looking at these things and going, okay, this client is paying a higher rate. We need to look at the overall return. So,
you sleep at night. If you've got multiple properties and they've got a negative cash flow, especially if you're self-employed.
Some of those are fantastic example, Christian. Looking through the Eden's Landing as an example, that's about 8.32% return. And some of the other ones are quite easily about 6% or so return. Now, Paul, from your point of view, and from your point of view, you invest quite a bit, you acquired quite a bit in different parts in Queensland as well as Hobart. So a couple of examples from your end, if you like.
Yeah, these are just a couple of recent examples, probably from the last 7 days of a few different options that we've got working at the moment. One we picked up literally started this week in Goodwood. Just if everyone's familiar with Hobart, essentially you've got Glenorchy, which is probably your main engine room from an economic perspective, about 12 minutes. It's northwest of the CBD, encompasses about 7 or 8 different suburbs within that. I'm giving away a lot of our IP here, so write it down. Essentially, suburb directly below that, Goodwood, just covers one of the bays of the Derwents, just around the corner from Mona, Art Museum, etc. This particular client, and I guess going back to strategy, is Hobart for us as a company is not necessarily a market saying get into Hobart irrespective of what else is in your portfolio. this is a client who's got a couple of other investments in parts of Brisbane, a couple of other investments in parts of Sydney, an investment in Melbourne. And really this is looking for a cash flow, but also a equity generation play. So this purchase, I believe we've picked it up for 300 flat. We only just literally on the drive here finalised some discussions with regards to a defect limit of $1,000 to make sure the agent didn't want to really ruin us after a building of pest comes through and they wanted to screw us to the floor on it. But it's going to get $360 a week rent on that particular property, which is all good and well. Can't see it from this particular picture, so top left here, but there's actually about a 7 metre driveway on the left-hand side of the property. It's just short of about 820 square metres, I believe, and they're actually looking at some really big changes in Hobart at the moment, in particular the Glenorchy local government area, where they've got a massive undersupply issue. So on that front, they're looking at incentivising developers to come in and really create supply out there. So this property is enough to the front, enough to the right-hand side. It's a legitimate subdivision, and we're talking about already quotes up to around about $225,000 for a brand new 3-bedroom house straight behind. That'll rent, and literally we've got another property. I think anyone that was here last month when we talked about another Hobart property that we just secured, which was about 1,012, I think it was just short of 1,200 square metres subdivision. We've actually now got offers on 2 off the plans for that particular client. They're literally about to settle. I think we're settling next week. So they've got offers from an agent who just sells off the plan at the moment for 2 separate properties that they're going to be developing, already got planned in council, 2-bedroom villa, 3-bedroom house at the back, keeping the front house, 345, 320 for those 2 properties, plus keeping the front house, 345 purchase price. I guess the point of that is that there is a huge amount of demand for owner-occupiers. And these aren't investors buying these properties, these are owner-occupiers buying these properties. There's a massive undersupply. Rents are going to be upwards of 7.5% for that particular portfolio. This one in particular as well, we're looking at total value of that new property to be built is looking at around about 350 to 360. Keeping the front house will still be worth in the vicinity of around about 285, renting for probably around about 340 to 360. So there's excellent numbers that stack up there. Again, for us, it's not necessarily to put all of your money into that market. It's a bit of a hedge, but that particular property sort of fit that brief, where decent cash flow, upside for some development, but do nothing if you don't want to do anything as well. Something in the West Brisbane that we picked up recently, I believe we picked that up, is that this week, Scott? I think it was this one on, I think it was on our Dingo.
Yes.
Yeah, so we only just secured that this week. 1,200 block, 340 purchase price, 345 a week rent. It's a fully renovated property, but also side access. And you can see in that picture, it's a bit hard to see, but on the other side of the street, down the bottom, there's already been a subdivision there. So just there's been an equivalent subdivision just a bit to your left. That's already been done. Realistically, we've already got opportunity in that market for us to go and cut this property, 5 metre access, cut it in half, new build at the back. Now again, based on development costs, it doesn't necessarily mean that that stacks up as a deal for us just yet, but we can hold this as about a 5% yield opportunity, knowing that we've got this in the bag for a development down the track for a client who knows that they want something that gives them neutrality in cash flow, but also says that down the track this is going to be a value-add proposition for this particular property. So that's one in West Brisbane. I don't know if we provide any elsewhere. Oh, there's one for North, so this is North Brisbane, Moreton Bay. If anyone's familiar with Moreton Bay, you can see there's water in the background, so you'll probably be pretty familiar with where or what that might be or what location. I won't give it away just yet because it hasn't actually settled. I believe we're doing some final discussions on purchase price points at this stage, but this is an absolute cracker for us. 3 units in one block, rezoned 21 metres. The property can probably have somewhere in around the vicinity of 10 to 12 units built on it as it is. Its purchase price is $345. It actually was $545 and rents combined at the moment, it's fully tenanted at $650 a week. But for us, it's about a close to 7% yield on the property as it stands. However, it's still a long-term play because it's great cash flow, but that corner to the right-hand side, which you can't really see from this picture, is actually a DA. And there's off the plans happening for about 65 units, I believe, Lena, and that exactly. Yeah. There's literally going to be, I think it's a 6 or 7 story unit development selling across the road. That's in that particular pocket at the moment.
There's huge demand in that area because the hospital is.
Yeah, so you probably.
So there's never vacant.
Yeah, so we've got really good demand for owner-occupiers, downsizers, medical professionals. You're walking distance to a hospital in that pocket, but really for us, that's a fantastic cash flow play with it's a good 10-year long-term opportunity for a subdivision, a development, whatever you see fit. But it's not necessarily forcing your hand because obviously cash flow is fantastic. Now, Do we get those every day? I wish, but no. That's something that we literally stitched up. I think
You've got to be
over the
in the
weekend. and I'll give a bit of background for no one will know this person anyway. But that particular property, this is a very bizarre scenario. But this was the person who owns this property right now. Anyone who knows where I grew up will know this street. But I won't tell the street. But literally, the street behind me was my old neighbour. One of the people I grew up with. I didn't find out of this property via them telling me. I found out via a financial planner who was their financial planner who said that she's got an offloaded property because she's buying a physio premise for one of her businesses. And he told me her name. I think, you can't be serious. And then having a discussion with her, she needed to offload it. We ended up buying it directly through the vendor. And these are the scenarios where it ends up being very advantageous for and sundry. She saves, we save, we get the outcome, she gets the outcome. But it happens in a way that's very conducive. It's very difficult, truth be told, to work with vendors directly, and I don't like doing it if I can avoid it personally, and I don't think we do because there's just a lot more probably additional layers involved. But really, to get deals like that, that's where we get access to stuff that we just
I think
never
Paul,
get access to.
that's one of the benefits which I see with the buyer's agency. I mean, there are many benefits, but one of the benefits which I see is that it's your time being in the market, right? So those opportunities comes in is simply because you've been in the market 7 days a week, all the time, and sort of many of the properties that you buy are not from these are off market sort of purchase, right? So just purely on that number of 545 or 650, that's brilliant, and the potential is absolutely obscene. So I think that's a brilliant buy.
Yeah, very good. All right, so that wraps up, and the amount I've learnt from you guys, and we live and breathe this stuff is phenomenal. And it just from what I've learned about the New South Wales development, some of the opportunities that you guys are finding in a tough market. Let's face it, it's not an easy market at the moment, but there is still great opportunities in every state, really. And as you say, it's about buying well and using services of the professionals that are in the market. So big round of applause for our buyers agents. Thank you.
Jackie, Paul, and Christine will be around for a few minutes. So if you guys want to have a little bit of chat, if you want them to be contacted, by all means.
Is there any burning questions for the guys before we? Yep.
Christine, I think you're talking a lot about having to be correct your granny flats in Queensland, but I thought a granny flat can only be for a relative in Queensland. Has that rule changed?
Council rules. I know that in Ipswich it can only be a 1 metre maximum, I think vice versa. So the council does change it, but they don't have to be rented out to relatives. They wanted to. You get different people in council that try to change the rules all the time, but the councils do have very different sizes as well. So at the moment it's 60 square depending on the size of the block, up to 100 square depending on the size of the block. So having that knowledge to begin with before you buy the property, you obviously got to buy it. It's the council rules at that stage.
Any other questions? Right, as we said, the guys will be around, so feel free to have a chat before you go. The forms, if you do want to speak to either a broker, an accountant or a buyer's agent, definitely put your details down there and we'll get the appropriate people to get in contact with you. So,
I guess knowledge is not power. Applying what you've learned is. So next step is to see one of the brokers, speak to one of the buyer's agents and speak to Montreal Jeremy and the accountants in regards to getting yourself organised. I read a great article through the week and it was about a life coach or a business coach, and he said most successful people have one thing in common, and it's action. They don't wait for perfection before they act. They act. They might need to tweak things as they go, but as we say, perfection prevents profit. If you wait for the perfect property, it does not exist. So acting is the key to being successful moving forward. So next action is to speak to one of the professionals and let us know who you need, and we'll more than happily put you in contact with them. Next seminar is the 22nd of May. Munzeril and Jeremy will drive this one, and it's how to maximise your tax refund by property investment. We always say, or Munzeril always says, that the tax benefit of owning property is not the purpose, but it's certainly good side note. And maximising your return is a hugely important part of being a property investor. So please invite your friends along for an important meeting around tax time.
Yeah.
But thank you very much to our guests. It was really interesting, and as Ross mentioned, they'll be hanging around to answer any questions that you've got. But thank you all very much for your attendance.